Good evening again. I am settling in after returning from New York and from our spring session, which originally was our winter session. And it was, speaking of angels, it was a wonderful gathering of bodhisattvas, two-legged and four-legged, fully mobile and mobile learning, I guess. And it was really delightful, during the weekend to have Helen, Kaito, and Katie's 2-year-old come up to someone just at random times and be like, "What are you doing?" And, at different points, people would explain what was happening in that moment. And at a certain point, she, in fact, declared, Sankai, that we were all Buddhas. So it was really wonderful to have that affirmation, if you will, from Helen. Wonderful to dive right into the silence and stillness of Sesshin, and all of us in one space, right, more tangibly, one mind. So I don't know if this happened for you, but it did for me. That the transition into Sesshin really was seamless. I didn't need a warming up period. There was no settling down period where I would just, let my mind wander all over the place until it's quieted down enough to do the work that I came to do. There really was none of that. I stepped into the zendo, I took my seat, and I was in it. I was inside the silence, inside the gathering of the mind that is Sesshin. And it felt as if we had been sitting together for a month or for years, right? And not just a few minutes. How wonderful to be so comfortable together, so trusting in all that space, all that silence. May it always be so. May we always care for one another in the way that we do, and protect one another and love one another in this way and in every way. May we always recognize how important and how rare, how life-giving this practice is. Not because it's that way inherently, but because we make it so with our care. So it's a self-nurturing system. Practice works because we let it work. We cause it to work. We choose to make it work by aligning our thoughts, our words, our actions with its teaching, which is the teaching of the Buddha Dharma. May we always recognize how incredibly lucky we are to have found one another and to have found the Dharma, this ocean of Dharma practiced by an ocean of beings, an ocean of Buddhas, an ocean of angels. So tonight we're looking at the first Bodhisattva vow. I wanted to come back and give a talk on this vow. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. And I've asked, and you've answered, what it means to save all beings. And you've said it means to see you and love you and respect you and help you and celebrate you. You've said it means to see me as you and to help free you as I want to free myself. And this is indeed what it means to save all beings in the context of this teaching, right? To regard them, to free them, to realize them as no different from me, no more separate than my own hand and my liver, my heart. And in this way, it's a really beautiful teaching, isn't it? But then in this past week, how many times did you secretly want to kill your partner or your child? How many times did you wish that you were single again, or at least childless? How many times did you have to stop yourself from cursing at that driver who cut you off, the woman who stepped ahead of you in line? All examples, by the way, that I have taken from you, that you have shared with me. How many times have you caught yourself putting someone down in your mind for the way they talk, the way they act, what they do, they don't do? In the best of circumstances, with everything working in our favor, it's not so easy to regard all beings with love, is it? And these are the people who are close, or at least, who haven't hurt us in any significant way. And because of everything happening everywhere, really, I've been thinking, how do we love truly in the face of injustice, in the face of cruelty? How do we fulfill this vow? How do we meet another when we find their views, their actions reprehensible? How do we meet another? How do we get close when perhaps what they're doing is meant to separate and divide? I mentioned this the other night. There's a Chinese sutra called the Bodhisattva Jewel Necklace Sutra. And it takes these 4 vows and ties them to the 4 Noble Truths. And so, this vow in the sutra is expressed as, I vow to enable beings to be released from the truth of suffering. Now, the 4 Noble Truths are also known in the sutras as the 4 tasks. And the Buddha said that the truth of suffering must be understood. The root of suffering, craving, thirst, desire, must be abandoned. The cessation of suffering, nirvana, must be realized. And the path to the cessation of suffering must be practiced, must be developed. So in other words, these aren't just noble teachings that you look at every once in a while and that, make you feel good about being a Buddhist. They are actions, they are tasks that we should undertake. There's something that we need to do with each of these. Right? We have to understand suffering, we have to let go of craving, we have to realize enlightenment, and we have to practice or develop the path. And there are some scholars that say that it's actually better to translate the Pali for the 4 Noble Truths to the 4 truths of noble people. Right? So it's not that the truths are noble by themselves. They're made noble by the nobility of the people who practice them. by the realization of the people who practice them. You understand? Like sesshin, like sacred space, I've referred to recently. Sacred space is made sacred by our presence. Right? The silence, the stillness, the clarity that comes out of them are made so by our presence and our practice. And I don't even mean just human presence, but by the presence of all sorts of beings and things. But that sacredness is made, it's co-created. So is silence, so is clarity, insight. So is, to some extent, realization. And so are the Four Noble Truths and the path. And so that is why no one, not even the Buddha, can realize themselves by themselves. No one can be themselves by themselves. This is why we need each other. Why we rely on each other, we support each other. Because a single wave cannot exist by itself. It needs the whole ocean. It needs the whole ocean to be itself. How wonderful is that? I vow to enable beings to be released from the truth of suffering. I vow to help all beings understand suffering and its root. Just as we say in the Four Immeasurables, may all beings be free of suffering and the root of suffering. And here, in that iteration, is expressed as a wish. It's an invocation. When we make the vow, we're saying, I will take part in doing that. I will cause that to happen. I will do my part to help beings understand suffering and let go of its root. I vow to help point them in the right direction. I vow to encourage them when they're flagging, celebrate them when they're able to take a few steps. And we can do that. I think all of us can do that. If I may, like Sonkai saying to Komyo, I can't let you sit by yourself at 5:30 in the morning. And so he gets up at what is 4:30 for him to sit with her. But tread carefully here, because what does this vow look like when we're talking of Hamas or the big oil companies, right? They're drilling away our last natural reservoirs. How about people who specialize in stealing from the vulnerable? At the end of Sesshin, on Saturday night, we were speaking about scams, phone scams, internet scams. And I was telling the group that there was one time I was staying at the temple and I was covering for the week. Normally I would go when the monk who was in charge for that period of time was on vacation. And I don't remember who was in charge that week, but I was there covering for them. And I picked up the phone one day and a guy said that he was from Coned. And he was talking really fast, you know, that very clipped but kind of authoritative voice. And he said that we hadn't paid our bill for a couple of months and that if I didn't pay today, they would cut the electricity. And I had just arrived at the temple. And I thought, I can't have them cut off the electricity. There's people living in the building. We're going to have a retreat in a couple of days. And I got a little flustered. But, I did have the presence of mind to think, I'm not going to give a credit card number to a stranger on the phone. So I said, hold on for a second. And I went over to the files and I checked them. And I pull out an electricity bill, and it's from a different company. It's from Zuisei. It's not even Con Ed. So I get on the phone and I said, we don't even have Con Ed. Is this how you want to be making a living? And I hung up. But then afterwards I thought, afterwards as in recently, I thought, what a missed opportunity. If I had been more skillful, maybe I could have helped shift something. Because as I was going to the airport here in Playa to go to Sesshin, I took a cab. I was talking to a cab driver, and I said to him, because it was something that I had been thinking of recently, I said, as a woman, I'm always concerned about safety when I get into a cab. And I said, but I've just recently been thinking, you guys take strangers into your cab, into your car all the time. So that has to get iffy sometimes. And I said, have you had any tricky situations? And he said, yeah, there's been a couple. And he said that there was one guy, he picked up a guy and he was acting just a little strange. So the cab driver had a feeling right from the beginning. And the guy asked him to drop him off at a different point that he had said originally. But the first thing the guy said after getting into the car was, aren't you worried I might rob you? And how's that for an icebreaker? And the driver says, no, not really. Aren't you worried I might rob you? And the guy just laughed. And they kind of hit it off. And the cab driver is very religious. He was playing hymns, in the car when I went in. He says he plays them all the time. And afterwards, when he dropped the guy off at the place where he had asked, some of the cab driver's friends saw the guy get out of the car. And afterwards they were like, that guy, you need to be really careful because he's part of a gang and he's been mugging cab drivers. And the guy said, oh, he was like really nice with me. And not only that, he picked him up more than once. And they always were like perfectly fine. Something about the driver caused the other guy to just leave him alone. And then he said another time, a guy goes in the car. It seems like this was a theme. I wonder, in fact, how often this happens in Playa. Another guy comes in, and it was immediately clear that he was high. So he's really strung out, and he says to the driver, I need to rob someone today. And the guy starts talking to him, and he says, you don't really need to do that. This is going to hurt you. It's going to hurt other people. And the hymns are playing in the background. And he says, why don't you just come to church with me? And the guy does. On the weekend, he goes. He goes to church with a cab driver. And for all we know, he's still going to church, and he hasn't robbed anyone again. All because of this one being he met, and this man's faith, and this man's love for another being. So I missed my opportunity with that particular guy. And how does a release like that come about? Through understanding. right? The cab driver, instead of berating the man, instead of fearing him or judging him, he understood at some level, consciously or unconsciously, what was driving him. There are situations where that may not work, where, perhaps you are in danger. Even then, there have been people who've talked themselves out of very difficult situations through making contact, essentially. And I think, the outcome of the story is less important than the intent. The way the cab driver chose to respond to the situation, chose to help the man who'd come into his car, essentially asking for help. Right? He didn't need to announce he was going to rob someone or he needed to rob someone that day. He could just have done it, get it over with. But it was like he was begging to be seen, to be recognized. Like some part of him was saying, please help me. Save me from myself. And the driver did. He heard the call and he answered it, like Kanon Bodhisattva. So, suppose we take these 4 tasks and apply them to a meeting, a situation. Maybe a situation where we're meeting someone who's difficult to meet. Maybe someone we'd rather avoid, we'd rather ignore, tell off if we can. And instead, we reflect on these 4 tasks and we apply them to an interaction in order to help and not harm. Right? So first, we make an effort to understand this being in front of us. Why might this person be acting the way they are? What are they looking for? What circumstances, what set of circumstances might have shaped their view of themselves and the world? And of course, their actions, the actions with which they're responding to the world. What is that they want at heart? I think of that story that Pema Chodron has said. She was quoting, his name. I can't think of him. The famous inmate who's been in San Quentin for a long time, who wrote a book. I can't recall his name right now, but he writes in one of his books, it's something like there's a situation where he's fighting with where there's a very tense situation with a guard. And instead of escalating, the anger and the argument, the violence, the potential violence, he turns away, he walks away. And when somebody asks him afterwards why he does that, which in prison is where so much of your reputation is built on your ability to dominate. What this inmate answers is, because if I anger him in some way, he'll go home and take it out on his wife or his children. right? In other words, to be able to have a wide enough and a deep enough vision to see beyond the immediate circumstance, the immediate encounter, and to see what the repercussions might be of our actions. To understand that whatever is happening in this moment is not and cannot be the end. So, understanding. Then we let go. In this case, we let go of our own wish to set them right. It is not our job to teach another unless they have specifically asked. It's not our job to convince them or anything, to change their mind. Our job, if we have a job, is to meet them. Right? As I say in that invocation, when somebody becomes a formal student in the Ocean Mind Sangha, may you regard all beings with love. And if you can't, with respect. And if you can't, with kindness. And if you can't, with care. And if you can, with all of these, because they deserve it, as do you. And so anything that gets in the way of that, our opinions, our views, our judgment, our criticism, our comparison, we deliberately let it go so we can meet another. Not knowing what we'll find. Not knowing what we'll find. It's in that moment when we think we know that we stop seeing. So to be willing for at least a moment to be surprised by this other being. To really be willing to see them for who they are and not who we'd like them to be. So understand and let go, which in the tasks is phrased as abandoned. Third, we work to realize our unity, our identity. Right? We practice to see that this other being is me and I am them. That we are the same inside, as that Anaswar poem says. Inside and outside and everywhere. And we are also different. I am also not you. And I think this is perhaps one of the more challenging things about realizing our unity. Because it's not just, it's whitewashing. It's not, well, we're the same and so therefore our differences don't matter. Because they do matter. We are the same and we're also not. And so how to see me as you and you as me, as the truth, the underlying truth of things. And then the fourth is to practice practicing this every time we meet another, especially when the meeting is difficult. Some of you will remember this, that when I first started teaching again, started teaching online, I created what I was calling the Bodhisattva Academy. And in my mind, all our retreats and our classes and our sittings were really the offerings of this academy. And the purpose of this academy was to train bodhisattvas and to have them infiltrate the world. In my mind, they would be love warriors, kindness warriors, peace warriors, who are not afraid to let freedom lead. Not pride, Not jealousy, not stinginess, not self-righteousness, but love and insight, clarity and kindness. And so, haven't been speaking of the academy anymore so much or at all. Not sure why. One, because I was doing fewer classes, but this is really who we are and what we are, right? The training, the Bodhisattva training stands. This is really what we're doing. We're training to love when loving is hard. So maybe that's my contribution. Maybe this is my version of the first Bodhisattva vow. I vow to love you, especially when it's hard. Maybe that's a good place to end.